This is a real-time tutorial showing how I did the skin tones on my Bilbo Baggins drawing, and it's from a speed drawing one as well, so if you want to see the full video of the entire drawing from start to finish, there's a link below. So one of the first things that I did was try out my colour scheme, try out the colours that I was going to use for the skin, and I decided to do this on the neck, so I used the neck as a sort of practice area. I thought that the colours worked, so I decided I'd go ahead and instead of doing the large part of the face, I was still playing it safe, and the first thing that I did was start to lay down some base kind of flesh tone colours using the blush marker, and I decided I'd do that across the forehead in some of these fiddly bits, but more importantly in some of the small bits. I realised that that part where you can see his cheek and around the eye and towards the chin, that's a large area, that was going to be kind of difficult to do, so I thought I'd kind of find my way into this drawing a bit more gently by just doing some of these smaller areas towards the side of the face where there would be a bit of shadow and so on. Thought I'd do that first just to get my confidence up, just to make sure that they really did work. So here you can see me laying down blush marker, which is my base lightest colour for the flesh, and then I'm going to lay down successive darker colours on top of here and kind of blend those as we go. So you can see me beginning to use vanilla, which is a warmer, slightly yellowy marker that I'm putting down on top of the blush. Again, trying to give that idea of the flesh colours being different to, say the hair colours, because I've only got so many flex markers and I'd used a few of the same markers to do the hair, so I had to be careful using the right colours for the skin so that it would look different to the hair. And here you can see me using one of my go-to markers, Dusky Pink. I really like this colour when I'm doing flesh tones. It's just a little bit darker than the sort of basic flesh tones that you're going to put on, like the blush marker and other sort of very pale pinks. Dusky Pink just suddenly darkens up, but not too dark, some of the shadows that you're going to be putting on the skin. And already I can see that the colours that I'm using for the skin look different to the hair, so I don't have to worry too much anymore about the flesh tones and the hair looking too similar. Here I'm going in with coral, which is a deliberately kind of pinky kind of colour. Obviously the guy's got like flesh tones, and I wanted to use not only just sort of pinks and yellows, but something that was a slightly stronger pink when it got to the shadow areas. And there I am just going in with a bit more dusky pink, just trying to blend the edges of that coral that I've put down, because it is quite a colour change from the previous three markers that I've put on. I'm using a reference picture to help me get the colours correct on this, and it's quite an extreme light source coming in from what is the left hand side of our picture. So it's shining across the face, and you're going to see me build up quite a few shadows with the marker that I'm using at the moment, Cinnamon. I'm using FLEXMARKERs and Promarkers together here to make sure I got the right colours that I need, and they seem to be blending together absolutely fine. There seems to be no drawback in using two what appear to be very different markers together here. They blend together just fine, and I'm also making sure that I'm working on it kind of wet on wet, so I'm not allowing those marker colours to fully dry before I'm putting on the next one or trying to blend the next one. The shadows on that side of the face are looking okay now. They're not too dark, and I've just done enough colour to give me an idea of where they're dark and where they're light, but I can always go in with a darker colour later if I need to. As I draw the eyebrow in here, hopefully what you can see is that the 5 marker colours that I've used so far are beginning to blend together, and you're starting to get a flesh tone that changes nice and gradually. So it's beginning to look as though it's working, so I've got to be brave now, and I've got to start tackling the bit that I've been putting off, which is working from around the eye into that large part of the face, the cheekbone down towards the jaw. You might be watching thinking, well, what's he so worried about? Well, large areas, if you've ever used markers before and you've tried to blend them over a large area, it's much more likely that the strokes of your pen are going to show up and streak and whatever, not blend very well. And basically when you've got a large expanse, a large area that you're trying to use the markers across, it's really unforgiving, and any little mistakes and any little bits that have not quite gone right or uneven are really going to show up. So that's why I was a bit fearful of doing this bit. One of the ways that I'm looking to get around that is by laying down a base coat of the blush marker that you can see me using, and I'm working nice and quick to make sure that as I lay this marker down, because it bleeds a little bit because it's still wet and it's an alcohol based marker, that it won't show any of the streaks, because each time I sort of whack that colour on, it kind of bleeds a little bit into itself. And also just keeping it wet. You can see me putting the vanilla marker on now as well, straight away, in the hope that, again, as I flick those strokes away from where the shadows are, it won't streak too much. It will blend a little bit with the still wet blush marker that's underneath it. It is tricky to do, but if you are looking to blend your markers a bit more and not have them a bit streaky, then you've got to try and practice working quickly with them so that they're still wet when you apply, each next color on top of each next color, and that almost naturally allows them to kind of flood a little bit and blend together without being too streaky. So I'm laying down a bit of vanilla marker here, trying to put in a few light areas of shadow. By that I mean the shadow isn't too strong. I'm just giving myself an idea of where those shadow areas are going to be before I put down darker markers on top. And I said that there was a really strong light source on the left hand side, so most of those shadows are going to be towards the right hand side of the face. And areas that you want to have a highlight on, like the edge of the nostril, you just got to leave those as you go along and not colour them. You can see me here going in now using Dusky Pink. I've already got my blush on and I've got vanilla on, and the Dusky Pink is darkening some of those shadow areas now. But again, I'm trying to put it on while the other markers are still wet, so hopefully they will all blend together and I won't get any streaky edges or drying lines, drying edges. And I'm just trying to use a little bit of Dusky Pink in there on top of the blush and the vanilla to darken some of those shadows a bit more. I know some people don't like using a large amount of markers. They try to stick to a small amount because they complain that their colour looks a bit blotchy when they use a lot of markers. I know what they mean, but basically if you make sure if you're using quite a few markers, each one is darker than the one that went previously, I always find that seems to avoid any kind of blotchiness in the colour. It's when you put a colour on top of another one that is almost the same tone or is a little bit lighter but it's just a different colour, that's when you start to get really blotchy areas in your colour. So I've got 3 colours on the large part of the face at this stage, and the bit above the cheekbone is blended in really nicely. I'm quite pleased with that. It gives a good idea of the shadow, and also down the side of the nose towards the lip. So that's all going okay. So at this point I decide I'm going to start adding coral, which is the next darkest colour, and it's that sort of darker pink which gives much more sort of warmth and sort of pinky kind of flesh tone quality to it. And as I build up the shadows with coral, it does look quite a bright pink, quite garish almost. But I know that I'm coming along afterwards with the cinnamon, the brown marker, and I can use that to kind of change the overall colour balance of that pink. And I can also go back in with Dusky Pink and blend in some of those edges that look quite strongly pink at the moment. I choose the colours that I'm going to use by making a little sort of test piece of paper first of all. Use exactly the same kind of piece of paper that I'm going to be drawing on, and I just pull out all of the flesh markers that I've got, or kind of flesh tones, and I sort of do a little swatch, a little scribble of each of the colours. And then after doing that I can pick usually 3 or 4. I try not to go as far as 5 usually, but I'll stick with 3 or 4 colours that are just gradually getting darker in tone, but I know will give me a sort of good flesh colour. In fact, making a swatch or a colour test of the possible colours you might use is a brilliant idea for any kind of marker picture that you're going to do. I do it before every single one, just to give me an idea of which colours I don't need, because otherwise you can swamp yourself trying to use too many colours, throwing loads into the mix. But a swatch helps you be much more focused and just use the colours that you think you might need. So here you can see I'm putting in some what looks like quite strong contrasty shadows as I put the cinnamon marker on. The shadow around his nose and down the bridge of his nose looks quite strong. But obviously I've popped it on top of the coral, so I'm hoping it's going to blend a little bit there. But I know that I can go back in with the coral marker, maybe a bit of vanilla, Dusky Pink, and I can soften and blend those edges a little bit. So I'm looking at it now and it does look really strong, but I'm not too worried about it. After all, a large amount of shadow, a strong amount of shadow might add to the drama of the scene. And here I am using Dusky Pink to soften those edges and just put a bit over some of those darker colours that I've just done in an attempt to make those edges blend in a little bit more and not be so stark.
you can sometimes find yourself working backwards through your markers. You know, you've put all of them on and then you sort of start using them all in a reverse order to try and blend those edges back in. You know, and I'm using the vanilla here to do just that. It's going over the edge of Dusky Pink, so I'm working my way back to almost the second marker colour that I've used. It can seem quite time consuming and oh, maybe you don't have to do that, but I do find that if you really want to get your flesh tones to blend successfully, you do need to do a bit of this. You do need to put your markers on in order and then work back through some of them, maybe not all of them, but some of them, if you want to get you know, a nice blended effect that perhaps when you look at this picture sets how I've done the flesh, aside from how I've done the hair, where the hair is just layered markers on top of each other and there is no attempt to blend those colours together. So here you can see me doing the high risk bit, which is the really dark colours on the cheekbone. I've laid down cinnamon, I've done a bit of coral, and I'm just trying to blend along those edges now with things like Dusky Pink and vanilla to make sure that it's not going to be too strong a colour change. It's going to change gradually. And I'm using both blush and Dusky Pink here on top of, you know, the lightest parts of my face as well, to just try and blend those colours in, whilst all the time worrying that I might be putting on too many markers, I might be layering it up way too much, and it starts to streak, and all of those streaks start to show and ruin the effect that I'm trying to achieve by blending those flesh tones. Hopefully you can see it beginning to come together at this point in terms of all the colours that I'm laying down and the shadows that I'm trying to achieve. But it does look a bit zombified with those white eyes at the moment. So the next thing that I try to do is get those eyes in, just fill in a few greys there, and then start to deepen some of the shadows that are on that right hand side of the face where there's virtually no light getting at. And the hope is that that will, you know, kind of split the face one side and the other and give it a lot more depth. It's almost finished and I'm mostly pleased with it, but there are some areas that haven't blended as well as I would like them to and look a bit streaky, so it's clear that I've got still a bunch of practice to do doing flesh tones, and some of my future videos will probably tackle this again. Thanks for watching.